April 12, 1943. 25,000 feet above the icy North Sea, the roar of Allison engines rattled the thin aluminum skin of the P-51 Mustang. Frost clung to the canopy. Inside, Second Lieutenant James "Jimmy" Caldwell gripped the throttle, knuckles white, eyes scanning the horizon for anything that moved. The wind screamed past, slicing through the tiny cockpit like 1,000 needles. On the tarmac back in England, the American pilots had laughed. "Too fragile," they said. "We'll shatter the first time it dives." The P-51 had slender wings, a sleek fuselage, and a reputation for being elegant, almost fragile. But Jimmy didn't have time for opinions. He had B-17 flying fortresses in his charge, lumbering steel beasts carrying bombs deep into the heart of Germany. And today, they were his responsibility. The sky was empty for now, but the tension was palpable. Every Mustang pilot knew the Luftwaffe could appear in a heartbeat. You can almost feel Jimmy's heartbeat, a rapid drum echoing against the cockpit walls. He whispered a prayer, adjusted the throttle, and squinted into the sunlight glinting off the contrails of his squadron. But then a glint, a shadow streaking across the clouds. Messerschmitt Bf-109s diving in perfect formation. The enemy. Jimmy's stomach clenched. The fragile fighter he flew, the one dismissed as too delicate for combat, was about to face the deadliest pilots in Europe. Would it survive? Would he survive? The 109 sliced through the sky like knives, engines screaming, leaving trails of dark smoke in their wake. Jimmy Caldwell tightened his grip on the Mustang's stick. The air around him trembled with the shockwave of cannon fire. Bullets peppered the sky, pinging off the aluminum fuselage of the B-17s he was meant to protect. At first, the P-51 shuddered under the attacks, flexing its thin wings like a dancer resisting a storm. Pilots whispered to each other over the radio, voices tight with tension. "This thing, it's holding." Each maneuver felt impossible, the stall margin thin, the speed bleeding off with every evasive roll. But then Jimmy felt it. The Mustang responded with a grace no one expected. The Merlin engine roared, propeller cutting cleanly through the cold air, pushing him faster, farther than the old Allison could have dreamed. The Luftwaffe pilots were calculating, precise. They had dismissed the Americans' new toys, expecting easy kills. But these Mustangs weren't what they expected. Jimmy barrel-rolled under a 109's wing, firing in perfect rhythm. One plane went down in a flash of fire. Another barely escaped as he shot past. The fragility the critics feared became its greatest weapon: speed, agility, and unshakable responsiveness. You can almost feel the adrenaline surge through Jimmy as he races between the bomber formations and the enemy. The Germans had never seen anything like it. And suddenly, the fragile Mustang was no longer fragile. It was lethal. But this was only the beginning. The sky ahead was darkening, and Jimmy could see the faint outline of Berlin in the far distance, deep behind enemy lines. Could the Mustang take him there and back? The map on Jimmy Caldwell's knee was little more than a scribbled sheet of hope. Every mile closer to Berlin meant thinner skis, more flak, and more deadly Luftwaffe patrols. The B-17s lumbered ahead, their massive engines a deep growl against the roar of his Mustang. Like slow giants, he had to shield with every ounce of speed he had. The air above Germany was thick with tension. Anti-aircraft batteries rumbled below, spewing fire into the clouds. Jimmy could see tracer rounds zigzagging through the sky like furious vipers, each one a silent threat to the fragile Mustang. Pilots around him whispered over the radio, breaths heavy, voices cracking. "Stay tight, stay alive, don't let them through." You can almost feel the sweat freezing on their helmets as the Mustang twisted and dove, weaving through the deadly dance. Then it happened. A formation of Messerschmitts appeared out of the clouds, engines screaming like predators. Jimmy's heart jumped. He pressed the throttle forward, Merlin engine screaming in response, the Mustang almost vibrating with raw power. Each evasive roll, each split-second maneuver brought the enemy into his sights. One by one, he picked them off, the fragile frame holding against impossible stress, wings bending under pressure but never breaking. And all the while, the B-17s pressed forward, oblivious to the ballet of death surrounding them, trusting Jimmy and the other Mustang pilots to shield them. The sky was chaos, fire, and ice, yet the Mustangs moved like living weapons, unbreakable in the moment that mattered most. But Berlin was still ahead, and beyond the city, an even deadlier storm awaited Luftwaffe interceptors armed with everything they had left. Could the fragile Mustang carry them that far? April 12, 1943, now 10,000 feet above the outskirts of Berlin. Smoke from burning factories curled into the sky, the city beneath a twisted maze of streets and shattered rooftops. Jimmy Caldwell's Mustang shuddered as flak exploded around him, pieces of sky raining down in fiery bursts. Each concussion shook the plane like a fist pounding on aluminum. He could almost feel the city itself pushing back against him. Then came the unexpected. A squadron of Focke-Wulf FW-190s dove from above, engines screaming with lethal intent. The Luftwaffe's finest, pilots trained, ruthless, and confident. They expected the American escorts to crumble. But the Mustangs held their formation, weaving, diving, and countering every attack with a precision that seemed impossible. Jimmy felt the Mustang respond like an extension of his own body, every twitch of the stick translating into survival. From disbelief to awe, even the Luftwaffe aces couldn't understand it. Too fragile, they had scoffed. Now, one by one, their planes began to fall, forced away from the bombers by the relentless Escort. The P-51 was no longer a fragile toy. It was a harbinger of destruction, fast, durable, and unyielding. Jimmy's mind raced, adrenaline and fear colliding. He glanced over at the B-17s, hulking through the sky like armored behemoths. Without these Mustangs, they would have been sitting ducks. And yet, somehow, here they were, still intact, still marching toward their targets. But survival in Berlin meant more than just fighting the Luftwaffe. The way home would test the Mustang and Jimmy even more. Could the fragile fighter endure the return trip under the same punishing sky the bombs had fallen? The roar of explosions faded into a distant, rumbling echo as the B-17s began their lumbering retreat. Jimmy Caldwell's Mustang cut through the smoky sky, engines screaming, wings slicing icy air. But there was no relief. The Luftwaffe was waiting. Fighters regrouped, circling like sharks, hopping to catch exhausted bombers and their exhausted escorts off guard. Jimmy's hands ached on the controls, eyes burning from the glare of sunlight bouncing off metal and smoke. Tracers sliced past his canopy, some scoring close hits, leaving jagged pings in the aluminum skin. He felt the Mustang shudder with each near miss, but the Merlin engine roared defiantly, refusing to fail. This fragile-looking frame, dismissed by his own countrymen, now carried the weight of survival for dozens of men. Time slowed in the sky. Maneuver after maneuver, barrel rolls, high-G dives, tight turns, Jimmy and the Mustangs created a moving wall between the bombers and death. One after another, the German planes broke off, frustrated, bewildered, defeated by an aircraft no one thought could dominate the skies. You can almost hear the muttered disbelief in the enemy cockpit. What is this? They had expected weak escorts. Instead, they were met with speed, precision, and relentless aggression. And deep down, Jimmy knew the Mustang had proven something far greater than anyone could have imagined. But the war wasn't over yet. The return across hostile skies was still fraught with danger. Would the P-51 live to see England again? The English coastline shimmered faintly on the horizon, a fragile promise after hours of relentless combat. Jimmy Caldwell's Mustang groaned under the strain of battle, wings flexing, fuselage peppered with flak scars. Every fiber of the plane had been tested to the limit, every pilot pushed beyond exhaustion. Yet somehow, the fragile Mustang held together, cutting through clouds and the chill of high-altitude winds like a blade through silk. Below, the B-17s lumbered, battered but intact. Jimmy's squadron kept formation, the roar of their engines a protective chorus. The Luftwaffe had tried everything: ambushes, diving attacks, relentless pressure, But one by one, their numbers dwindled as Mustangs intercepted and outmaneuvered them. Every evasive roll, every high-speed climb had been a gamble, and every gamble had paid off. As they crossed the channel, Jimmy allowed himself a fleeting glance at his instrument panel. Fuel tanks were low, engines strained, but the Mustang, once mocked as too fragile to fight, had done what no one thought possible: escorted the bombers deep into Germany and back, surviving where others would have fallen. You could almost feel the awe in the radio chatter, the stunned voices of pilots realizing what they'd just witnessed. But even as England's green fields appeared beneath them, there was no celebration. Because for every Mustang that returned, for every pilot who survived, the war in Europe raged on. And the legend of the fragile fighter, the plane that no one believed in, was only just beginning. Back on English soil, the Mustangs taxied to the airfield, engines still humming with the fury of combat. Ground crews ran forward, astonished at what had returned. The planes bore bullet holes, scorched wingtips, and the scars of every engagement, yet each one had carried its pilot and the bombers safely home. Pilots climbed out, faces pale, hands trembling, but eyes alight with disbelief and awe. Jimmy Caldwell stepped down from his Mustang, wiping sweat and frost from his brow. Around him, other pilots muttered the same words over and over: too fragile, and yet we did it. The airfield, usually a place of routine, buzzed with a new energy. News of the Mustang's performance spread quickly. Commanders, strategists, even skeptics began to rethink what had been dismissed as a delicate aircraft. The fragile fighter had become a symbol of impossible achievement. Somewhere in Berlin, Luftwaffe pilots would recount the same disbelief, the same shock that an American plane, slender and elegant, had outmaneuvered them at every turn, protecting the bombers and carving a path through the sky. From scorn to reverence, the P-51 Mustang had rewritten what was possible in aerial combat. And yet the story was far from over. Every flight into Germany now carried a new sense of confidence, but also new dangers. Could the Mustangs continue to dominate the skies, or would the Luftwaffe adapt and strike back in ways no one expected? Weeks later, in briefing rooms across England, commanders pored over reports from the front. Casualties were lower than expected. B-17 missions were finally reaching deep targets in Germany without total annihilation. And everywhere the word spread. The P-51 Mustang, once dismissed as fragile, was now indispensable. Jimmy Caldwell and his squadron became more than pilots. They were the standard-bearers of a new era in aerial warfare. Their Mustangs, slim-winged and unassuming on the ground, had transformed into icons of resilience and power in the sky. Engineers back home took note of every tweak, every adjustment that allowed these planes to dominate enemy airspace. Even the skeptics, those who had laughed at the fragile fighters, were forced to admit this was a plane that could change the course of a bombing campaign, one mission at a time. The Luftwaffe, once confident in their supremacy, now faced a new reality. German aces whispered of the American Mustangs that appeared like shadows, striking with precision and vanishing into clouds before retaliation. Pilots who had trained their whole lives for air dominance now feared a plane that had been written off before it even flew. And for Jimmy, every flight carried the weight of that knowledge, that he in a craft once mocked had become a shield and sword for hundreds of men below. But the war was far from over. Every sortie would test them again. Every sky held the threat of destruction. And somewhere above Germany, the next challenge waited, silent and deadly. By late 1943, the Mustang's legend had grown beyond the airfields of England. Pilots like Jimmy Caldwell were no longer just flying escorts. They were pioneers of a new kind of aerial strategy. The combination of the Merlin engine and drop tanks gave the P-51 an unprecedented range, allowing them to escort B-17s and B-24s on missions deeper into Germany than any Allied fighter before. Each mission was a test of endurance and nerve. Clouds churned with ice, anti-aircraft fire cracked like thunder, and the Luftwaffe lurked above every formation. Pilots learned to rely not just on speed and agility, but instinct. Jimmy could feel the plane, every vibration through the stick, every pressure on the rudder pedals. The Mustang responded like a living creature, anticipating his maneuvers before he even made them. Yet every success came with tension. Could the fragile wings really withstand repeated flak hits? Could the engine endure the long hours at maximum throttle? Every sortie was a gamble, and every safe return only reinforced the Mustang's near-mythical reputation. Crew chiefs began calling it invincible in spirit, even if its frame bore scars of battles that would have grounded any other plane. And somewhere over the Ruhr Valley, German pilots began whispering the same words in fear and disbelief. The Americans, they have a ghost in the sky. No plane should be able to do this. The Mustang had become more than metal and fuel. It had become a symbol, a psychological weapon, and a turning point in the skies over Europe. But even legends faced their true test. The next mission would push Jimmy, his squadron, and the fragile Mustang farther than they had ever dared before. Early morning, March 24, 1944. The sky above central Germany was steel gray, thick with clouds that churned like boiling water. Jimmy Caldwell checked his instruments for the third time in 10 minutes. Fuel levels were low, flak warnings were flashing, and every radio channel buzzed with anxious voices. Today, the B-17s were heading straight for Berlin again, the heart of the Reich, and Jimmy's Mustang squadron would have to carry them there and back. The Luftwaffe waited. This time, more experienced aces, better tactics, and heavier formations. Jimmy felt the familiar thrill of fear mixed with adrenaline, the sensation of being both predator and prey. Every dive, every roll, every acceleration was calculated to the second. He could almost feel the wings flexing under stress, aluminum trembling, yet refusing to fail. The Merlin engine's roar became a hymn of defiance against the storm of bullets and tracer fire. Suddenly, FW-190s appeared from above, slicing through the clouds with deadly precision. Jimmy reacted instinctively, the Mustang diving and twisting, bullets whizzing past his helmet. Around him, Mustangs rolled in perfect formation, creating a moving wall of defense. B-17s below continued on course, heavy bomb loads swinging but safe, trusting the fragile fighter to protect them. One by one, enemy aircraft were driven away, forced to break formation, retreat, or fall. And in that moment, Jimmy understood fully what everyone had doubted. The P-51, once called fragile, had become unstoppable. From skepticism to awe, from mockery to legend, it had rewritten the rules of air combat. Every pilot who returned that day knew they had witnessed history, that a plane deemed too delicate had carried the weight of an entire bombing campaign. Yet the war raged on. The skies over Germany would demand more courage, more innovation, and more of the Mustang's impossible resilience. And pilots like Jimmy would continue to test the limits of both man and machine, knowing the next mission could be their last. Back on English soil, the Mustangs rolled to a stop, engines winding down to a hum. Ground crews ran to meet them, eyes wide at the sight of planes bearing hundreds of miles of battle scars, wing panels riddled with flak holes, fuselages dented, canopies streaked with smoke. The pilots climbed out, faces pale, bodies trembling, but eyes alight with the unspoken realization. They had just changed history. Jimmy Caldwell leaned against his Mustang, hands on the worn aluminum. The plane that had been mocked as too fragile now stood as a testament to innovation, bravery, and sheer human ingenuity. From the skepticism of airfields in England to the shattered skis over Berlin, the Mustang had proven itself as more than a machine. It was a guardian, a weapon, a legend. Military strategists took note. Commanders across the Allied forces now planned operations around the Mustang's unprecedented range and performance. Every bomber mission deeper into Germany was now possible, every escort flight more survivable. The Luftwaffe, once confident in their domination of the skies, faced a new reality. The fragile fighter was a ghost, fast, resilient, and almost impossible to defeat. And for every Jimmy Caldwell who flew those missions, every mechanic who labored over drop tanks and Merlin engines, every crew chief who patched battle damage in record time, the P-51 Mustang became a symbol. A symbol that what others dismiss as fragile, delicate, or impossible can, with courage and ingenuity, become unstoppable. The legend of the Mustang endures, an aircraft born in doubt, forged in fire, and immortalized in the skies it conquered.